Welcome, Shaker community, to the latest episode of Equity Unscripted. I'm JeffriAnne Wilder. I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Ms. Erica Merritt, who is the founder and principal consultant for the Equius Group. So welcome, Erica, to Equity Unscripted. We are so happy to have you today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, it's been a while since you and I connected, and I think one of the last times we connected, the roles were kind of reversed. You spent a lot of time deeply embedded in the Shaker community, particularly in the district, helping to march the district forward as it relates to equity initiatives. So, and when we connected, it was during the time that I was interviewing for my now new job. So, how about you start us off by telling us about all the wonderful things that you're doing in the DEI space in our community?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Jeffrey. And it's so good to see you and so excited for the roles to be reversed. I truly, if I'm honest, right, as a business owner, it is not every consulting project that's hard to leave. But the work that I did in Shaker and the people that I got to know both inside of and outside of the school district mean a lot to me. And so I genuinely miss the folks that I connected with throughout the Shaker community. So really excited again to be here. I primarily my work falls into three buckets: coaching, consulting, and training. And I work primarily with nonprofit organizations and educational institutions. There's a for-profit organization here or there, but primarily I'm in the space that I spent my career in. Probably not a surprise, right? So I spent my career in higher education and then K-12, and also interspersed throughout there were several nonprofit organizations. And so I'm sure like those are the places and the spaces that I've cultivated relationships, and those are the places and spaces that have been sustaining me since I stepped out on my own. Those are probably also the places that I genuinely, I know best, right, in terms of organizational change, because I've been able to do that from inside of those organizational structures. So that's really right now, I find myself doing a lot of deep dives around really looking at organizational culture and thinking about organizational change as it relates to racial equity. I am doing less sort of one-off kind of engagements and much more uh, deep work, really thinking about how we move the needle. And that's what gets me excited and keeps me wanting to get up and do this again the next day.
I think that's really interesting, this notion of your work that you're doing is moving from just kind of, this quick sort of superficial, as you talked about, one-off kind of interactions with organizations and individuals to more deeper engagements. And perhaps that's reflective of where we are now as a nation. Let's kind of go back in time. And I've been asking guests to kind of talk about how things have shifted so much over the past year. 2020 was a wild and crazy year, but it was also wild and crazy in a good way as it relates to social justice, racial equity, really moving the needle. What do you envision as being palpably different now doing this work? Because we know so much has happened since the death of Breonna Taylor almost a year ago, the death of Ahmaud Arbery coming up on a year ago very soon, and then ultimately the death of George Floyd this past May. What do you think is different now and position us to perhaps be better off, if you will, as it relates to doing these deeper dives and deeper engagements with equity?
Yeah, I think what you have right now are organizations, some of whom were not thinking about this work
Mm-hmm.
before before May of last year,
Mm-hmm.
who then I think often, through pressure, and I consider pressure in this case to be a good thing, either from the external community or from their employees inside of the organization, or simply having leaders in place who looked at what was happening across the country and realized that this isn't just about Black people being killed by the police, right? That what we see and what we saw at that time is a symptom of a
Yeah.
bigger problem, which is
Mhm.
the challenge of systemic racism, which of course is deeply rooted in the history of this place that we all call home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and so what I've seen is organizations who haven't, or I've seen other organizations that have said maybe because of the pandemic we were not prioritizing this
Mm-hmm.
work in the same way, and oh, absolutely, we need to be doing that. So it's not everyone who was starting from scratch. For some organizations it was a moment of revitalizing the work they were already doing. For some others it was, we need to continue on this
Yeah.
path that we've been on, right? We need to remain focused and steadfast even in the midst of all of the other things that are happening.
Mm. Have you ever turned down an organization wanting to do this work? So, have you found yourself in a situation where there has been an organization or community who really wants to move the needle in DEI work, and you recognize that there really wasn't alignment, perhaps with core values or organizational culture? What kind of things are really important for you as you take on clients who want to advance equity in their respective communities and organizations?
That's a great question. And the answer is both yes, I have turned down organizations. And the second, or what I would add to that, is I've had an experience at least once of an organization I should have turned down, which
Ah.
has led me to be much more discerning, right, in the projects that I take on. And as I that the latter, as I've shared that with other friends who are in this work, they said it's, because I've been in business full time for 3 years, and they've laughed at me and said it took 3 years for that for that to happen, right? So absolutely. I have learned to talk about this work in a different way. So to get organizations to think about this as a change management process, and to really understand that there is no one and done. I in general don't take on many of those sort of one and done engagements anyway. I That has just not been where my energy has been, just since I've been out on my own. But I've learned to ask some different questions and really get a sense around how far the leadership of the organization is willing to go, and how are they thinking about this. So if they get external pressure at all, right? If they get pushback from their clients, or if they get pushback from their board, or if they, how committed are they really to doing this work?
Well, I really believe it is important to be strategic and thoughtful when taking on new clients and really ensuring that folks are authentic. So, what made you decide to, do this equity dance with Shaker? Can you tell us a little bit more about, because from what I understand, I know that it was more than just a year engagement, that you've been really connected with Shaker Schools doing some equity work for a while. Can you tell us that story of how you've become connected with our community and helping us to lift up the work that we're doing?
Sure. So I was first connected to Shaker through the Equity Task Force. So when the Equity Task Force was originally formed and the district was moving in the direction of creating an equity policy, I was reached out to by a member of the task force, and we had a conversation about what some training for the task force members might look like. At the time, I had a 5-day program called Prism, 5 full days, deep dive into racial equity, framed around the 4 levels of racism. And essentially the sense was, we think that's amazing, and in many cases, many of the people who are involved are volunteers, and so probably can't give 40 hours. And we also need to move a little bit more quickly than that format is designed. So I created something for Shaker called Leading Equity, that was, at the time, it was a full day and then 3 3-hour sessions, and has evolved to be 5 3-hour sessions during the pandemic, because who wants to be on Zoom all day, no matter how interesting the content. But I created that program. I, again, delivered it for the Equity Task Force. And then I also delivered it. There were 2 different Shaker community cohorts that went through, and that was a mix of people from the school district and also members of the community. And then finally, when Dr. Glasner came on board, and we had some conversation initially about doing some more of this work within the district. So obviously the community was very engaged and thinking about issues of equity. And of course, people in the district were thinking about that too. But really, how do you create shared language and shared understanding across leadership within the district? And so initially the focus was there, but then evolved to, oh, actually, we need more support. And so I spent for almost a year. I have no sense of time anymore, but I believe it was about a year in the district, 1 full day, and then often another half day during the week, working on a variety of things, and ultimately including, helping the district really think about the idea of having a permanent role, right? Having a place where this work was going to live permanently. And therein, the opportunity came for the district to hire you.
Which we're all very, very thankful for and excited about. And
Yes, we are.
really credit your leadership and assisting the district and being able to do that, particularly during such a tumultuous time as 2020, trying to navigate the pandemic and shifting to remote learning and all these different things occurring at the same time. As I was going through the interview process, the one thing that I always remarked about was, how important this role and fulfilling this role was to the district, because it was a commitment to continue to push forward in spite of the pandemic and all the things that were happening. And so what are your thoughts around, you and I personally have talked offline about, roles like this, EDs or chief diversity officers or what have you, as a result of 2020, that kind of role, an executive level role, whether that's in a school district, at higher ed, some type of corporation, nonprofit, chief diversity officers and the like. Those jobs have been the most popular, right, over the past year. And we see organizations sort of en masse trying to hire folks into these roles. We know, you and I both know as women of color who have been doing this work in the space for a long time, that positions like this sometimes can be tokenized, right? And we know that there's an overwhelming representation of women of color in these kinds of roles. What kind of things do folks need to be mindful of if they want to hire someone in a role like this? What are the promises and pitfalls of ensuring that you hire the right person into the role, and then also that you're creating an environment for that person to be successful?
I have lots of thoughts and feelings about this for sure. I, it is, on the one hand, this is like the both end of things, right? On the one hand, it's an exciting moment that organizations who perhaps had not thought about having a role that was dedicated to this work are not just thinking about that, they're doing it. And at the same time, I think there's this interesting, I don't even know if this is a word, but it's about to be deprofessionalization of this work that I find very concerning and very disturbing. So I'll speak to the organizational piece first, and then I'll speak to the field piece. For organizations thinking about this, I think there are several things they should consider. One is that no matter how brilliant and talented the person is that you hire, they cannot do this work alone. And there was an article, it was probably about 2 years ago, and the title was something like, "Hiring a chief diversity officer will not fix your racist culture." And I love that piece. I have shared it many times with people who are thinking about hiring someone, right? And so I think there's a process that the organization should go through before they make that decision. They should understand that no one person can fix the systemic issues that are present in their organization. They should also understand that that person is going to be someone who has to do work through other people. And so, where is your senior team in moving this work forward? Because a lot of what you're doing at that chief level role or that executive director role is getting your colleagues, oh, and by the way, this should be at that C-suite level. This should not be a coordinator position, right? This should probably not be a manager position. If you are looking to affect change truly, this person needs to sit at the table where decisions are being made, right? And be a peer to the people that they need in order to move this work forward. So I think there needs to be some work done with that senior team ahead of time and some hard conversations had as that person is coming in so that they understand that they are going to be a essential part of this work as well, because essentially the chief diversity officer is trying to get their peers to do work differently so that the peers can get their people who are reporting to them to do the work differently. And if either one of those pieces breaks down, you're not going to get the kind of systemic change that you want. The other thing I think is really important is resources. And by resources, I don't just mean the salary of that person, right? Are there people resources? Are you funding a department or do you have a vision, right? That at some point this person is going to have support, because that's the other thing, you'll have a chief diversity officer or some sort of role. They'll be the only one without any support staff. And they're supposed to make all of these amazing things happen. So those are some of the things that I think are really important from the organizational piece. The other thing that I was saying about the deprofessionalization of this work, you've seen it, I'm sure, where the organization takes the one person of color that they have, that person might be in finance, like who knows where they are. And then they say, you should be our chief diversity officer. So you just did a couple things. One, you took someone who has no expertise in this field, and it is a field that requires expertise. Two, you took, and I am not saying you can't learn. I just want to be clear about that, right? I do believe that people can evolve into this work, but you would never take your chief diversity officer and make them the CFO. And yet the inverse, I see that happening. And so you've done a couple things. One, you've again potentially set someone up for some real challenges because this is not their area of expertise. And by the way, just being a person of color, being Black does not make you an expert in the field. And then two, you have also potentially missed the opportunity. So one of the things you just said is this field is a place where absolutely there are many people of color in this field. And so you potentially also missed an opportunity to add another person of color or someone else who may be a part of another marginalized group, because we are drawn to this work, I think for obvious reasons, to be a part of that leadership team. And that is where I think some of that tokenization plays out as well.
There were so many nuggets in there. I don't know, like which ones to grab first. I'm waiting on, right?
About this.
Listen, I do too. I mean, I feel like we could talk about this for days and days. I mean, I feel like there needs to be, one of the things I've always sort of mused about is, this kind of, let's just prop up a brown person, right? Let's prop up a person of color to make us look good. And let's do this window dressing, right? Because you see so many ranges of outcomes happening when you hire someone at this level, even if the resources are there, and even if the mission sounds great. These organizations, lots of organizations who've got wonderful missions and visions, but that does nothing to change the hearts and minds of the people who are actually a part of the organization and doing that work. And I think it's really important. You talked about a lot of really important things in there to ensure that equity is not the sole responsibility of the person sitting in that job, that is the responsibility of everyone who is a part of that organization, and that person in that role happens to be a convener and a facilitator of the work, right? That they are not ultimately solely responsible for that. And I think that so in my interview process, I had to create a 90-day plan, right? And I think also it would behoove organizations to create a 90-day plan for that person, right? So of course that individual needs to walk into the job knowing what they're going to do, but the organization should also create a 90-day organizational plan for how they're going to be supportive and ensure that the person in the job is successful, and that the work that they're doing and the way in which they're doing the work is ultimately sustainable. So I don't know about you, Erica, but I feel like there needs to be a toolkit, right? Like there needs to be a toolkit for folks doing the work, right? Because I think people understand, or at least have a good grasp of all the things, the best practice related to hiring someone, but then we lose the boat when it comes to making sure that person is set up for success. So I don't know if Equius creates content, but that would make a really, really great toolkit. And I know about the article that you referenced around, the racist nature of hiring chief diversity officers. I was also very struck by an article that came out about a year ago that said, so you've hired a chief diversity officer, now what? Right? You thought about, have all this strategy and thought partnership and leadership and creating the position, but you also have to make sure that the position is sustainable. So there's so many good nuggets in what you said, and we completely see how and why you are leading equity in this space in our community. So just a couple more questions as we wrap up. What's your vision for equity for Northeast Ohio? Where do you see our community going? What direction do we need to head toward? Tell us a little bit more about pathways for equity in our community.
That's a really interesting question. So I'm thinking about that in a couple different ways. I am thinking about that in terms of what does power look like? What does collective power look like? How do we in the community harness, right, that power? I think, one of the interesting opportunities coming up is the mayoral race. in the city of Cleveland, which impacts us all, no matter where we live, right? If we live in Northeast Ohio, that is the biggest city, and so goes Cleveland, right? Has an impact on the region. And so I think that whoever ends up in that role needs to really have a vision around equity for the city. And that is, I mean, obviously we're talking about everything from, health to thinking about jobs, thinking about criminal justice, thinking about neighborhood revitalization. And by neighborhood revitalization, I don't mean just gentrification, right? I mean creating and developing communities that, and not creating, because there are lots of communities in place already, but investing in the communities that have not been invested in, that have been sort of left to themselves. So there's so much work to be done there. And at the same time, I think about like cross sector work. And I want to see more of that because, to what I just said, we know that this issue does not only live in education, right? But it lives in education, and it lives in housing, and it lives in health, and it lives in criminal justice, and it lives in, media, and it lives in jobs and, the economy. And so all of these different things are interconnected, and solving any single challenge isn't going to fix this because they are all like interlocking and connected to each other. And so I think that what I would love to see is more tackling this in a way that is across sector and that is collaborative. Because again, no one person, no one entity has all of the answers. And if what is most important to us is creating an equitable future, then we really have to find ways across a variety of lines of difference to do that together.
I don't know if you've ever thought about a run, making a political run, but it sounds like what you said is the recipe for success for our community. So, I mean, you might want to consider, think about it, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean,
I am tickled by that.
Well, I mean, we've seen all the wonderful things where, particularly since 2016, right, how women are jumping into the political arena and like in droves, unprecedented ways, particularly women of color. So I don't know, don't quit your day job, but also think about like, what that might look like, right? Because you articulated a fantastic vision that excites me in thinking about like being away from Cleveland for 16 years and coming back. It definitely is exciting for me. So I don't know. If you need to do some campaigning, you just let me know.
I love that.
Let me know.
I appreciate that for sure, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
And I think there's a place for all of us, right, in making a contribution to moving in this direction, whether it's through politics or not, remains to be seen. But I think that there is work for us all to do from where we are, right? And who do we need to be connected to and in relationship with to actually move. So one of the things I'm interested in and sort of intrigued by right now is, thinking about Shaker, that there is a role open with the city. Yep. And so I've been thinking about that and thinking, oh, what a great opportunity, right, for whoever ends up in that position to be partnering with you in the district, and just thinking about the amazing impact that, I mean, obviously not just to people, right, but building that connection and that collaboration in another way between the city and the school district around equity could be extremely powerful.
That's the kind of synergy that we need, right? Because, to your point earlier, we cannot do this work in a vacuum. And we cannot think of folks in this role doing the work in silos. We need to do the work collaboratively and together. And we need those like intersecting areas that are cross-cutting, as you talk about, whether that's education or city politics or, hospitals and medical, areas. All of those things, of course, we need to leverage our united, capacity to really move the needle in our community. And in order to do that, we need to unite as equity partners in this work. So I think that is, that is the vision for our future, right? We're thinking about just Shaker in general. That person, whoever that person is, when they step into the role, is going to be an automatic collaborative partner for me and then also for our district. So, gosh, I wish we could just keep our conversation going. This has been such a very rich, enriching conversation, very engaging. And, maybe we'll have you on again so we can do a part 2, because I feel like
I would love that.
we need to tackle some more things in a part 2. So we'll stop the conversation here for this moment. But we know that we look forward to having a part 2 conversation with a C-suite extraordinaire, Miss Erica Merritt, who is the founder and principal consultant for the Equius Group. Thank you so much for being a part of Equity Unscripted. And I'm Dr. JeffriAnne Wilder. Until the next time, thank you all so much for joining us.